Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Better Care Forum. I'm Tom Harrell, and tonight's theme is the success strategies for people with disabilities. We are fortunate to have with us three guests tonight. We have Patrick Keneally, Board Chair of the Nevada Sierra Regional IHSS Public Authority. Welcome, Patrick. We have Tony Sauer, Executive Director of the Nevada Sierra Regional IHSS Public Authority. Thank you for coming. And we have Nancy Seiden with us, who is the chair of the Yolo County IHSS Advisory Committee and has been since its beginning in 2000. Currently, she works with the Research and Training Center in Neuromuscular Diseases at the University of California at Davis in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation Research. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you.
Patrick, I want to start with you, and I'm hoping you could give us a little bit of an explanation into some of the basics of caregivers and their importance for people with disabilities.
Well, they're our biggest asset in what we do day to day, helping us get up, bathing, dressing, depending on your level of care, food prep, maybe administering some health meds, that type of thing.
Okay. How does one go about finding a caregiver?
There's a number of ways. If you're on IHSS, through the public authorities in each county. Private pay, you could do it through an independent living center in each county. Or a lot of people, typically word of mouth or newspaper methods.
I think people also use family members, often do it, but you have to make sure that family members don't get burned out.
Is that a change, the use of family members? I don't know if that's a change in policy to allow family members to be paid to be caregivers, or has that always been the case, that family members have been allowed?
I think it's a change, but across the United States, I think that probably about 70% of the providers or personal care assistants are family members. So,
Yeah, I could actually add to that.
Okay.
In California, up until recently, the federal government would not contribute to the family member care. And we've had a change recently, although the state's been doing it, I think, since the inception.
Okay.
So federally, there is a problem paying for family care providers, even though they do most of the work.
and I'd like to add that the importance of family or of caregivers in particular, I'm a person that uses family members, but mainly my caregivers come from outside. And the importance of the caregiver in my life is that I use personal care assistance very extensively, and people are taking care of me from the top of my head to the tip of my toes, and they're doing everything from shampooing my hair to filing my fingernails to putting a stamp on an envelope. So my care is very extensive, and I'm at a far, like an extreme end of the continuum. So I use for housekeeping, for personal care, for everything really.
Do your caregivers specialize in a certain area of care, or can each one do kind of the same functions if that's necessary?
Well, I have help 3 times a day, every day, 365 days a year, and that's when I'm well. If I'm sick, then I require more care. People don't really specialize. I hire people through ads. I prefer to train people myself, so that it's nice if they have some experience, but usually their experience doesn't really translate to what my needs are, because I use respiratory equipment. My care has to be done in a certain way. So it's very detailed and very extensive. And I usually use a provider, a current provider, one of my better providers, to train the next person. So I'm trying to model for the new person what the current assistant is doing, both both in the task that needs to be done, the way it's done, and the behavior of the person.
Sure. Are there any requirements set by the state, for example, can anyone be a caregiver, or do you have to perhaps do a certain number of hours of training and receive a certification? And on the other end of things, what should someone look for in hiring a caregiver?
I can maybe take that one, Tom. For someone to work in the In-Home Supportive Services program, and we call that IHSS, that program, people do not have to be trained for the most part. An individual can hire somebody off the street if they'd like. Many times, as you mentioned, it's a family member. If they come through one of the public authorities, which we're involved with, they could very well have some training, and the more training they have, the more apt that they would be to be hired. But no, there's no requirement for training.
Okay.
I think some counties differ in what they require of somebody to be on the public authority registry. And some counties require, for example, a DOJ check and also fingerprinting and a background check. As a person with a significant disability who needs the flexibility to be able to hire somebody, like if I need them, I can't wait for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks for somebody to go through that process. So while I think that should be available to people who want to want to feel more secure, but I've had assistance since I was 19, so that's like 40 years now. And so I've learned how to sort of sense a person's background. It is good to check references on people, though. But I also wanted to say something about the importance of public authorities and the push or the emphasis for people to have choice, to have control, to be able to remain in the community, live in the community, participate in the community. And the United States has a history, which is still in effect today, where the money is really being put toward institutional living. So we have, on the one hand, institutional living, and on the other hand, we have the independent living philosophy, and where people have the right to choose who is going to work for them when they come into their home, how the job is done. Because personal care assistants are not necessarily nurses, so they don't have a set way of doing something, but rather they come into the home and they're there to take direction really from you.
Okay.
But we're hoping that money will go with the person, and that people have this right. We need to push the independent living philosophy.
Speaking of the money, I guess I'm curious, if you qualify for IHSS services through the public authority, is the caregiver paid directly by the authority, or does the authority give the client the means to hire their own caregiver?
They're paid by their respective county, and it's basically a share in cost, not a share, but the state will typically pick up about 70%, and the county will pick up roughly 30%, in our county in particular. I believe that's...
It's actually about 20% county, and then the state and fed share the balance.
And is there a typical hourly payment or salary that caregivers are given?
Well, up until recently, it's been minimum wage throughout California, and the public authorities, the implementation of the public authorities began to let counties negotiate with the unions representing the workers to get a higher wage. And the wages in some counties are still at $6.75. The 3 counties we represent are $7.11 an hour. And other counties are upwards of over $10 an hour. So each county negotiates a wage with the workers separately, and the state will contribute up to a certain amount.
This is really a really important piece of information, because with the public authorities, part of their mandate is to negotiate and work. The county works with the union, but this is really And this is a critical piece with the advent of public authorities. This is what I see as the first major improvement in in-home support services for the state of California. And when you have higher wages, you have a higher quality
Sure.
worker. You have a worker who wants to train to stay longer. There was a crisis in California before the public authorities came into existence, and that crisis was that there was a high turnover. You couldn't get workers, and even today there is still a tremendous shortage of workers. And with this baby boomers coming along, and they're going to be more demand, we really need to beef up the job so that people find that it's a respected job in the community.
Right. Well, thank you for joining us for this segment of the Better Care Forum. Please stay with us for a further discussion of these important issues. And I want to thank Welcome back to the Better Care Forum discussion with our guests Patrick, Tony, and Nancy. Nancy, before we took our last break, you were, I think, talking a little bit about caregivers and how improvements can and still should be made to how the system works, and I was hoping you might be able to elaborate a bit on that.
One of the things that I see is needed and may already be ongoing with some of the public authorities is to have like an immediate on-call service, because there are situations, sometimes many situations, where a caregiver gets sick, doesn't show up, is caught in traffic, but you still need to go to the bathroom, you still need to go to bed, or you, and so this immediate on-call is an important service, but it's very difficult to get your group of providers together who are willing and able and have a broad background in being able to work for a variety of people, and also then getting when the consumer needs to have somebody. And so marketing is really needed for that, but attention needs to be given to that. The other thing that's upcoming is hourly task guidelines, which I find to be a very slippery slope. And what the state is trying to do, in my opinion, is to micromanage how long it takes a caregiver to do a certain task. The overall goal is to make it more fair and even throughout California, but I find that different caregivers take different amounts of time. Currently, the maximum number of hours per day is 9.4 hours. Now, for people with significant needs, significant disabilities, those that have Alzheimer's or have dementia, they may need more than 9.4 hours a day. And yet that, at this point, isn't really available. So anything that reduces their hours, I find to be very scary. Now, this is a very complex and vital program, the IHSS program and the public authority, but we want to make sure that accidents don't happen because the consumer, something happens to the consumer, or the provider gets injured. So we really need to still maintain a safe home environment for both the consumer and the provider.
Patrick, what do you find to be some of the greater challenges in terms of caregiving? I mean, is it a lack of training? Is it people leave after several months? Maybe a lack of retention because, at least so far, the pay is not that great. What are some of the challenges and hopefully maybe some of the solutions that could be offered?
For